We just got off a 7-night cruise and had the worst cruise cabin neighbors ever. What's going on? My name's Jared. Jordan is out booking your cruise vacations as your dedicated travel agents, and we are JJ Cruise. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have, well, an unfortunate story from the sea. We had the absolute worst experience in a cruise cabin, and that has to do with both the stateroom itself as well as our cruise cabin neighbors. But before we get into our story from the sea, please subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 75,000 subscribers. It's completely free to you, means the world to us. And while you're at it, hit that thumbs up. The story we have to talk about today is unfortunately one that even ended in a very violent threat. But before we get into the ending, we have to talk about the beginning and how it all set up. We went on a 7-night cruise on board the world's largest cruise ship at the time, right before Icon of the Seas came out. Yes, we were on board the world's biggest cruise ship, Wonder of the Seas by Royal Caribbean. Now, this was our second sailing on Wonder of the Seas, and we wanted to bring our friends who had never been on a Royal Caribbean cruise to one of our favorite cruise ships that Royal Caribbean has to offer. We did something unusual though. Because Wonder of the Seas is a cruise ship that is newer, the prices are a little bit higher than that of most other cruises. So we made the decision to go ahead and use a complimentary cruise voucher for an inside cabin for our Wonder of the Seas cruise. Now, luckily, for us, well, not so much for us, but for our friends, they actually upgraded their room to an ocean view cabin, yes, with a porthole window, and their cabin was fantastic. So please note, this one cabin we had is a one-off. It is a cabin that we highly recommend never getting, but all the other cabins we have seen on Wonder of the Seas has been a lot better and more traditional cruise cabins. Unfortunately for us, we had a guaranteed inside cabin. Now, of course, this means we don't get to choose our location, we just get the luck of the draw, and our luck was bad. We got a cabin in the forward, but besides that, one thing we did not remember or realize once we got assigned our stateroom was that we had a connecting cabin. So on embarkation day, we went to our stateroom. We quickly realized that this is not in a location we'd usually pick out for ourselves, but we knew we'd make whatever it was, how bad it was, the most of it, right? We will only have this for 7 nights. On future cruises, we have balconies or verandas or what other kind of cabins we really enjoy the most. This is just one sailing. Well, after 70 plus cruises, we can officially say this was our worst cruise cabin ever. And most of the reasoning was not just that of the stateroom itself, but the neighbors next door to us. So when we walk into our cabin for the first time, we notice it is quite small. Unfortunately, the size is much more limited than other inside cabins. On our first sailing, we did an inside cabin, but it was a virtual balcony inside cabin, which meant there was an extra space for a virtual window. Now, this floor-to-ceiling virtual balcony we thought was kind of gimmicky, to be honest with you. It did give you that extra light to make you feel like you might be outside, but in all, we didn't really feel like it was necessarily worth the extra money. We may take that back now, because that size of that inside cabin was actually larger than what we got with this inside cabin. This inside cabin not only was a bad amount of size and space for storage, but it also had really poor functionality. For example, the shower door didn't open all the way, so if you were someone of a much larger size than us, you would not be able to get in that shower easily without turning to your side and trying to maneuver through the toilet and the door to the shower because it did not open all the way. It got stopped by the bathroom door. On top of this, the closet was also poorly spaced to where when you slid the doors, you could not get to all the hangars. It was really poor placement of a lot of things in this cabin. There were some good things like the amount of outlets and the fact that there was streaming on the TV, so you could stream your Netflix or whatever it may that you have on your phone to your TV. But all in all, this was not a great cabin. That being said, we didn't think it was going to be unmanageable until later that night when we actually found out how connecting of a cabin it was. Our neighbors weren't there when we first arrived to the cabin, and we didn't spend much time in the cabin the first day because we wanted to go out and explore with our friends for the first time on their first Oasis Class ship. When we got back to the cabin that night though, we noticed that our neighbors were there. We entered our cabin and we immediately found out, without us saying anything, that we could hear every single word our neighbors said. And we know that that means what we hear from them, they can hear from us. So we immediately said to each other that we're going to try to limit our conversations inside the cabin, try to whisper or talk quietly just to be respectful of our neighbors. So we go to bed that first night. Luckily, they go to bed around the same time as us, so there was no issues throughout the night. That next day is our first day of work. We are travel agents, so a lot of our work is email-based and system-based. We're online and really trying to get as much done on our phones, tablets, or computers. But every once in a while, we do have to call into the cruise line to get something done that they can only do manually. Unfortunately, I was out and Jordan was in the room and he had one of these phone calls he needed to make. Of course, he knew that with our neighbors next door, he was going to try to keep it quiet. Obviously, it's a phone call, so there's not much you can do about it besides just talking at a normal level. And when the neighbors came into the door, took no more than 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, the neighbors say, "Wow," loudly as possible, "we have such rude cruise neighbors." Then they jack the TV up from a news channel to the highest level of volume possible. And Jordan was so annoyed. He wasn't doing anything wrong. This was our own cruise cabin and we work from the cruise ships and we don't do many calls, but when we have to make a call, we need somewhere that's quiet and private. So we wanted to make sure that we were respectful of our neighbors, but with that attitude to start it off, we felt like we were in for a ride. Days 3 and 4, we kept on getting the TV turned to a maximum amount of volume on their side, and they would just blast the television on a news channel. Now, I'm not going to say what news channel it was. I'm not going to say political anything. But one of the news stories that was coming out was regarding a woman who had allegedly been assaulted. Right after the segment ends, we hear the wife or the partner, the girlfriend, we don't know their actual relationship, but there was a man and a woman, and the woman blurts out, "That stupid, she deserves everything coming for her. She is such a liar." Sorry, I'm not used to these kinds of words on this channel, so I'm trying to figure out a way to bleep them, but still live on with the integrity or lack of integrity of which they came from. Of course, politics aside, I'm just confused at who knows when you can hear every single word that comes out of your mouth, why you would say something like that to where all your neighbors can hear it. It was really rude for her to do that, but it was not the only time she did something like this or he did something like this. The news channels were blasting every hour of the day, minus the nighttime, luckily enough, because these neighbors never left their cabin. This meant we really had to keep it quiet at all hours of the day, and we were trying to be as respectful as possible to these neighbors, even though they have not been respectful to us at all. As you can imagine, slamming doors, slamming closets, anything that you can imagine a bad cruise neighbor behavior, we got it all. It's like they wanted to go in their drawers every hour of the day, finding different items of clothing when they aren't leaving the cabin, so I'm not sure why they did that. But it really came up to a head when, towards the end of the cruise, one of the final nights, it was actually 2 nights before we disembarked the cruise, there was a cruise segment about polling for election. And it was just about how somebody was coming from behind, and they were talking and speculating whether or not that would have an impact on the race. It also talked about how 2 political candidates, if they were to go neck to neck, how one of them may win over the other one. Once again, not going to get into politics, just trying to give you a background so you can understand what led up to the comments. Once the segment was done, the man goes in and starts angrily yelling, saying, if this person doesn't win, there is going to be a civil war, and I am going to make sure of it. He talked about how many weapons he had and how he was going to make sure that this candidate was going to be the president of the United States and the candidate for all. And if that didn't happen organically, it was going to happen other ways. I'm telling you right now, I don't care what political side of the aisle you are on. At the end of the day, when someone threatens violence in general, if something doesn't happen that goes their way, that worries me. I am a citizen of the United States. I'm a fellow cruise passenger, and I am now worried that if somebody's going to say that and be angrily blurting that out loud in their cabin with their loved one when they know everyone can hear around them, that means we may also be in harm's way if they were to feel badly about any of their neighbors, which we already knew on day 2 that they said out loud that we were the worst cruise neighbors for talking on a phone in our stateroom. I told Jordan outside of the room all that happened because he was out, luckily not having to witness this. I was the only one in the room actually working away, hearing all of this happen. And once again, we took phone calls as much as possible elsewhere, just trying to be the bigger person and make sure that we barely talk or are in the stateroom and being, I guess, heard in that stateroom. After this all happened, I went and told Jordan. I was the only one in the stateroom at the time working, and I was really quiet. I wasn't talking on the phone or anything, but I went and told Jordan this because I just wanted him to know we are dealing with neighbors that are now threatening violence if something doesn't go their way. Luckily, we only had 2 days left of this cruise. We talked about whether or not we should talk to guest services or talk to somebody about it just in case something bad happened and there was actual action taken. But luckily, we didn't do that. We didn't have to do that. And we kind of wonder now if we should have. If these neighbors of ours were people that do this on every cruise and treat their neighbors with such disrespect, but we really want to just protect ourselves. We obviously are a couple, a non-traditional couple, if you will, and we didn't want there to be any type of provocation from us. But we want to know from you, what are your thoughts? Do you think we should have called somebody? Should we call guest services right when they did their first act on day 2? Or did we do the right thing? Should we have just been the bigger people, talk less, make sure that we are trying to be as respectful as possible, even though we weren't getting that respect reciprocated to us? Let us know in the comments below your thoughts. We love to hear from you. We hope this will be the last time something like this happens. And once again, if these walls weren't this paper thin, this wouldn't be a problem to begin with. So be sure not to book these inside cabins on Wonder of the Seas towards the front. They're connecting cabins, but they're in the front and in the center area. They're not on the hallways. They're in the center area towards the front. We'll go ahead and put the actual cabin number down below so you can know exactly what cabin to stay away from. But in general, this can happen on other cabins as well. So be aware, be mindful, because we don't want your cruise vacation to be ruined by some bad cruise neighbors. Thanks so much for joining us. Once again, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, hit that thumbs up, and until next time, see ya.